Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. So, today we're going to be talking about posing, and I'm going to be approaching it from a different perspective. I'm not necessarily going to talk about how to give exact instruction about how to pose, but more like share a philosophy or ideology that I'm adopting when it comes to posing. So, I start with this image because this is an image I was very proud of when I initially made it, and I think I think part of it came from the idea of how it was created and the fact that it has some flair to it, and it's not your typical image that you see everybody else make. But what I really want to discuss about it is how basically what I've learned from this making this image and how I see what my mistakes were and how I approached it going forward. So I'm talking about posing now, and when you look at this image, you see the couple at the bottom in the in the bottom of the frame holding hands separated, and that's a pretty mundane pose. It's a pretty standard pose. A lot of us do the poses where we have our couples look at each other and just kind of lifeless and stiff. And what I have decided to do, or what I started to do going forward, was try to have a little bit more life and movement in my image. um, One of I guess the three things you kind of look for in an image when you make it is, first of all, is light, second is composition, and third is moment. Those three things need to be in your image for it to really stand out and I guess evoke the emotion and feeling that you wanted to have. So when I look at this image, I see interesting light. I see interesting composition, but it pretty much lacks moment. And that's because the subjects are pretty stiff. So, what I'm going to do next is show you a second image that I basically took the lessons learned from this one and applied. And I made this image I made many years ago, but the one I'm going to show you I made a few weeks ago. This is a similar image remade and somewhat inspired by the one I'd made prior. And this one is a little bit more complex. The first one was not a multiple exposure; it was a single shot image, and the lighting you saw in the tunnel existed in there. But this image was one that I did a double exposure to create. So the first image was just the couple, in the scene, and the second image is a completely blacked out image with the light patterns in it, and I double exposed that to create this image. So now, when it comes to posing, as you can see in this image, there's a little bit more motion. There's a little bit more life, and you can tell the couple they are enjoying themselves. It shows a little bit more of the spirit of the subjects and how they relate to each other. Um, Now I'll go back to the other one. You can see that the vibe is totally different. And this is something that I have started to try to do a little bit more with my images. I still create images where they're somewhat still, you know, not stagnant. They're not moving, but I try to show a little bit more emotion. I try to have the couple show a little bit more emotion, so they might be the movement might be in their faces and their expressions and the way they hold each other, versus the actual physical body moving. Um, and I just feel like it just makes the images a little bit more lively. And how I approach this is, I try to have the couple do something that will evoke emotion. In this particular one, I had them dance and I had them twirl her around several times, and I just took multiple frames to try and capture the frame that best told the story the way I wanted it to be told, with enough separation between them, since it's an image where they appear really small. I wanted them to really stand out. And seeing how I do not have a blown out background behind them like I did in the initial image, I wanted them to at least fall in a place, a light area of the scene, so you could at least see them properly. So in this example, you know, I was creating somewhat of a silhouette of the couple, and I know that it's important when you're creating silhouettes to show their profile, so you can kind of identify and make out some of the features of the subjects in the frame. So I had them, stand next to each other and create enough separation and hold each other and look at each other and smile so you can see the sides of their faces or their profile, and kind of identify them. Um, but while I liked this image when I created it, I did looked I could still tell that it was somewhat lifeless. So I decided that the next time I shoot in that venue or that location, I try and incorporate a little bit more motion, a little bit more to make it interesting. Um, so I took the same idea from the first one, and I had my couple dance and move and do things to kind of bring that colorful side of them out. And I got that image. The images were shot around the same time of day, but because there was a moment here, facial expressions, gestures, I decided to expose a little bit brighter to show that rather than hide it in a silhouette. I think even as a silhouette, it would have been cool, but because his hands were in front of him and not some other place where you could see the detail in his hands, the gestures. I kind of decided that I would go, with a regular exposure versus a silhouette. And by doing these things, I feel like you really bring more out in the image and more out of your couples, and they can see this and feel some kind of emotion when they see it versus a really stiff, lifeless photo. And a lot of those lifeless photos are usually as a result of us focusing too much on technicalities, like either doing cool compositions and cool tricks, but not really focusing on the fact that you're trying to really photograph how your couples feel versus how they look. So this is another one. And I took those lessons from the first image, same location, and just applied it slightly different in the second one. So the third image. So this image I have shown, I shot in Alexandria, Virginia, and I created this composition. The composition drove my pose. The leading lines and having them kind of be equal, sit equally, like a mirror image of each other. But I tried to show some connection by having them hold hands. Um, the next time I approached this, like I ended up shooting in the same place again and creating a similar image, but this time I decided to somewhat improve on my posing so the couple feel look and seem more connected. Um, it's kind of hard to have two people sit at a point, so I still had to think of ways to have them be equal. So my image is still symmetrical. Have them be equal in the frame, equally placed on the frame, but still have a little bit more body language that connects them a little bit better. So here's the next image. Very similar composition. Very similar. This one is a little bit wider, but in this one, you know, I think it's a little bit more believable sitting position. His legs are crossed, their bodies are close, his hands are behind her, they're a little bit closer together, and they're more engaged. Um, just that little change in ID, like the body language, makes it a lot more believable to me. So, I will talk a little bit more at a different time about how I pose and how the light, sometimes the light or the composition I'm going for drives my pose. A lot of times the poses might not be this couple might not seem connected in my compositions, and that's because maybe for that particular image I am going more for artistic expression versus like photojournalism approach to romance, like really trying to show their romance. Um, I personally feel that every style has its place. Um, However, if you're delivering a gallery, it should be a combination of everything. Like you can't have all images be artistic expression, and there's no true. You're not truly capturing the connections between the couple. I will, however, show one more image that kind of helps explain what I'm referring to when I say artistic expression. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is basically talk about a pose that's formed completely on the idea of creative expression. This is a pose that doesn't necessarily show any true chemistry or connection between the couple. They're both looking into the camera, which is something I don't do often. I generally don't like those photos because it creates camera awareness and that takes away the voyeur experience. So it's not as photojournalistic seeming as it would be if they were more focused on each other. But because the lens I'm using and the stylistic effect that I'm trying to have in this image kind of dominates my drives the pose, I end up having to construct a pose that complements what I'm going for. However, there's still certain things that I take into consideration, like making sure I have the groom cross his arms because I don't want to chop off his hands. So because of his how close he is to the camera, if his hands were like in his pockets, they will be chopped off. So because I don't want to chop off his hands, I have him cross them and keep them above the bottom part of the frame. Same thing with the bride. I still take some guidelines from, posing a woman, and I have her put her hands on her hips to create separation between her arms and her body, which is, a lot more slimming. Um, and I have her turn sideways just to vary, their positions. And, since I'm using a tilt shift lens, I'm able to focus on both of them and do two completely different focal planes and have both heads sharp. And because that's kind of like what I was going for with this image, I had to construct a pose that allowed me to pull off the effect that I was going for. One interesting fact about this image: this was created in a bathroom in a hotel, and it has this miniature effect where she looks like she's completely smaller than him because both their heads are sharp. It gives the illusion of them being on the same focal plane, and she looks miniature. And his what's interesting too is the backdrop. They look like they're on the same backdrop, so she definitely looks a lot smaller than he does. But what's interesting is she's the it's a wall that's indented, so it bends, like it basically is indented, and she's actually further back closer to the wall, and the part of the wall that he's at is at his back as well. So it's just interesting that with the tilt shift lens and the interesting wallpaper on the wall, I was able to do that. Um, this is just an example of how the creative expression could affect the way you pose, and that's why I say it's kind of important to have varying ideas in your gallery. You can have the photojournalistic, we're in love, fairy tale type pose, and if you want to do something interesting and different, then you kind of adjust your posing to fit that image, but don't flood it with just one type. I mean, you can flood it with the photojournalistic style because I think that's probably more mainstream. But when you're doing like creative stuff that is more for you, the photographer, try to probably limit the amount of images you make like that, unless you are really truly known for that and people buy into it and that's exactly what they want. Then just go freak and go crazy and make the kind of images you want. So this image is another example of something that could have been stiff, um, and more of what I strive for when I am posing people traditionally in a stiffer, less, with less movement, like bodily movement. I try to get emotion. I try to get facial expressions. I try to get laughter and something that really ties them together, even though they're standing still. And being a little bit more traditional with posing. When you have them really bring out their personalities, which I feel is done pretty well in this image. There's a strong moment. Once you're able to get that, then it really does compensate for the traditional stiff posing method. Um, again, there's certain things I try to keep in the frame. I keep the hands. I make them bend joints, bend your arm so it's higher up, so I can see it and I'm not chopping it off. And you kind of look a little bit more engaged. Um, Connect, touch hands. He's touching her shoulder. He probably has his left hand behind her waist. And they're laughing. And you know what's interesting about this is their true personality. They were probably both drunk at this point. This was like after the reception or during the reception. Um, and but they're still able to connect, and I feel like their real personalities shine through. If you've seen this full wedding, the wedding gallery, um, you will see what they're really like, and she's really like that. She's big laughs and all that. So this was really their personality shining through, and you know, I just made sure I placed them. I first construct, as I said before in my composition, I first construct my frame. I raised my camera up because this is in DC, lots of crazy lights behind them and random stuff. So I raise the camera up and I make the background, and I use the lines from the crosswalk as leading lines to them. And I have, as far as lighting goes, um, uh, uh, I have a video light that my assistant photographer is holding over them. And we made this image, and I feel like it was decent posing given that I'm able to pull out that emotion from them. So this is generally what I strive for. And you can't always get body movements, especially if it's a tighter crop. If it's a full body shot, then you can have them do more and move around and stuff, and get that motion. But having the dead face to face stare, look into each other's eyes, no smiles, or the occasional smiles is a little bit stiff. And I feel like I'm everly trying to evolve my posing to show a little bit more emotion. Um, and if all the images don't have it, at least I try to make sure a majority of them do. So thanks again for joining. I hope this was helpful. I know it's not a step by step guide on how to pose. I feel like there's so much more material out there on stuff like that. And I feel like the biggest benefit of me having to comment on stuff like this is basically gaining my perspective, and how I view things. And, I think you can form your own opinions too. I don't think that you necessarily have to, unless you really want to have work that kind of, you know, with the same ideologies as mine, then sure, you can latch on to my thoughts on this. But I feel like at the end of the day, we are all individual creatives, and we need to build our own perspectives on how things can be done. But hopefully, for the people who wanted to hear about posing, hopefully this was helpful and just gives you a little bit more insight to how I pose. If you have any specific questions, please leave a comment, and I can answer them. It helps when it's people are engaged and able to share their thoughts and have questions, because then I could speak to things that really, you know, things you really want to hear. So I look forward to any questions. If you want any additional videos, or you want me to talk about anything additional, please let me know. It really helps, because I don't want to spend a lot of time doing stuff that isn't as impactful as you guys would want it to be. So please let me know. All right, thanks. Till the next video. See you guys. Thank you.